Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The world outside Max, as a window, seemed normal enough. At first glance, a busy street lined with old apartment buildings, cars honking, and pedestrians lost in their daily routine. But beneath the surface, something was wrong. He could feel it, a crackling tension in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm, only there were no clouds in the sky. Max sat on his worn-out couch, staring at the half-empty bottle of whiskey on the table. He hadn't slept in days, or maybe it was weeks. Time had become slippery lately, slipping through his fingers like sand. His dreams, or were they nightmares, had been too vivid, too real. Strange images flickered in his mind. Twisted landscapes, dark figures, moving at the edges of his vision, things that shouldn't. He was it. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake the unease that had settled into his bone. Ever since he'd returned home from the war, things had never felt quite right. Sure, he'd seen things, done things that no man should have to, but this was different. This was something beyond trauma, something darker. The television was on, though. Max couldn't remember turning it on. Static filled the screen. But he wasn't watching it. Instead, his gaze was fixed on the reflection in the window. For a moment, just a brief moment, he swore he saw a figure standing across the street, a woman dressed in dark clothing, her eyes locked on his apartment. But when he blinked, she was gone. His heart raced, the familiar rush of adrenaline kicking in. Max stood up, moving toward the window, but there was nothing unusual outside. Just the same old street, the same old cars, the same old world. Still something gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. Before he could process the thought, there was a knock at the door. Max froze. It wasn't the usual kind of knock. It was slow, deliberate, almost as if whoever was on the other side knew he would hesitate. He crossed the room, hesitating just a moment before unlocking the door. When he opened it, there was no one there. The hallway was empty, dimly lit by the flickering overhead light. But as he stepped out to look around, he noticed something lying on the floor, a piece of paper. Max bent down to pick it up. There was a single line of text scrawled on it in a jagged, hurried hand. Find the edge of darkness, or the world will fall. His pulse quickened. Max's fingers tightened around the note as a cold shiver ran down his spine. What the hell did it mean? Who had left it? As he stood there, a voice echoed in his mind, soft, almost melodic. Its sigh, already begun. Max, you must hurry. He spun around, searching the hallway for the source of the voice, but there was no one there. His head throbbed, the voice fading as quickly as it had come. Max shut the door behind him and slumped against it, gripping the note tightly in his hand. His instincts, honed from years on the battlefield, were screaming at him that something was very, very wrong. He could ignore it, go back to the bottle, drown it out like he had everything else since coming home. But deep down, he knew he couldn't, not this time. With a sense of dread clawing at his chest, Max grabbed his coat and headed out the door. Whatever this edge of darkness was, he was going to find it, or die trying. The city looked different at night. The streets were emptier, the shadows longer. Max moved quickly, his eyes scanning every alleyway, every corner, as if expecting something to jump out at him. He wasn't sure where he was going, but his feet seemed to know. They led him through the winding streets of the old industrial district, past crumbling factories and warehouses that had been abandoned for years. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every now and then he would catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of his eye, but when he turned to look, there was nothing there. Only darkness. Finally, Max found himself standing in front of a large, rusted gate. Beyond it was an old factory, its windows shattered, the roof caving in. The place had an eerie, almost haunted feel to it. But Max knew this was where he needed to be. He could feel it in his gut. Pushing open the gate, Max stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. His footsteps echoed off the walls as he made his way deeper into the building. His senses on high alert. Something was here, something unnatural. As he reached the center of the factory, a figure emerged from the shadow. It was the woman he had seen earlier, the one who had been watching him from across the street. Her dark eyes bored into his, unblinking, as if she could see right through him. Max, she said, softly. You vet. Who the hell are you? Max demanded, his voice rough. What do you want from me? The woman stepped closer, her movements graceful, almost otherworldly. "My name is Alina," she said. "I am here to help you." "Help me with what?" Max asked, though he already knew the answer. The note, the voice in his head, the growing sense of unease, it all pointed to one thing. "The world is collapsing," Alina said, her voice steady, but there was a hint of urgency beneath it. "Reality and illusion are merging. If you don't find the edge of darkness, soon everything will be lost." Max stared at her, trying to process her words. "And what exactly is the edge of darkness?" Alina's gaze softened. "It's at the point where our world ends and something else begins. A place where reality becomes fluid, where time and space lose all meaning. If you can find it, you might be able to stop the collapse." "Might," Max repeated, his stomach sinking. "That's not exactly reassuring." Alina sighed, her eyes full of sorrow. "I can promise anything, Max. The darkness is strong, and it's growing stronger every day. But Cherie's the only one who can stop it." Max clenched his jaw. "Why me?" "Because you've been to the edge before," Alina said, "during the war. You've already faced the darkness, whether you realize it or not. That's why I've chosen you." The memories flooded back in an instant, the horrors of the battlefield, the things he'd seen, the things he'd done. Max had always assumed that his nightmares were just the scars of war, but now he wasn't too so sure. "How do I find it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Alina reached into her coat and pulled out a small weathered map. "This will guide you," she said, handing it to him. "Be careful. The closer you get to the edge, the more dangerous it will become. The darkness feeds on fear, on doubt. If you let it, it will consume you." Max nodded, taking the map from her. His hands shook, but he didn't care. He had no choice. Now, whatever this was, whatever nightmare he was about to face, he had to see it through. The next few days were a blur. Max followed the map across the city, through places he hadn't even known existed, forgotten tunnels beneath the streets, hidden doorways that led to labyrinthine alleyways. At every turn, the world seemed to twist around him, warping into something unrecognizable. He saw things impossible. Buildings flickered in and out of existence. People vanished into thin air, and the sky seemed to shift from day to night in the blink of an eye. The line between reality and illusion had become so thin that Max couldn't tell which was which anymore. The creatures came at night, dark shadowy figures that moved like smoke, their eyes glowing with malevolent light. They stalked him through the streets, their whispers filling his ears, taunting him, feeding on his fear. But Max didn't stop. He couldn't. He was too far in now. One night, while crossing an abandoned bridge, Max found himself surrounded. The shadows closed in, their shapes shifting, their voices growing louder. "Give in," they whispered. "You can when the darkness is already inside you." Max gritted his teeth, pulling out the small knife he'd kept from his time in the military. It wouldn't be enough, he knew that, but it was all he had. The shadows lunged at him, and Max fought back with everything he had. His movements were wild, desperate, as he slashed at the darkness, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But no matter how hard he fought, the shadows kept coming, relentless, unyielding. Just when Max thought he couldn't hold on any longer, a bright light cut through the darkness. The shadows hissed, retreating into the night as the light grew stronger. Max collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. When he looked up, Alina was standing over him, her hand outstretched. "You were stronger than you think," she said, helping him to his feet. Max wiped the sweat from his brow, his heart still racing. What the hell were those things? "Manifestations of your fear," Alina said. "The darkness feeds on it. The closer you get to the edge, the stronger they'll become." Max swallowed hard. "And what happens if they get—" Alina's eyes darkened. "Then you will become one of them." The journey continued, each step bringing Max closer to the edge and closer to the truth about himself. The darkness wasn't just out there lurking in the shadows. It was inside him, woven into the fabric of his very being. Every night, the creatures returned, stronger and more determined than before. And every night, Max fought them off, though it was getting harder and harder to hold them at bay. By the time he reached the final destination on the map, a crumbling, overgrown building on the outskirts of the city, Max was barely holding it together. His body ached, his mind was frayed, and the darkness was closing in. Alina met him at the entrance, her expression grim. "This is it," she said. "The edge of darkness lies just beyond this door." Max nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that whatever lay ahead, it would be the hardest thing he had ever faced. But he had come too far to turn back now. Max stepped into the crumbling building, the air heavy and thick, almost suffocating. Each breath felt like it was being pulled through a veil of dust and decay. The place was darker than any night he had ever experienced. The walls seemed to pulse as though they were alive, breathing with an ancient, malevolent energy. It was as if the building itself had been waiting for him. Elena walked silently beside him, her face unreadable in the dim light. Max clutched the small map tightly in his hand. Though he no longer needed it to know where he was headed, he could feel it a pull, like gravity, dragging him toward the edge of darkness. His whole body ached with the tension of it, the gnawing sensation in his chest growing stronger with every step. The hallways twisted unnaturally, spiraling deeper into the structure. Max's mind swam disoriented as the architecture itself seemed to change and shift. Sometimes he felt like he was walking in circles, other times it felt like he was descending endlessly, plunging into an abyss. Elena remained close, her presence the only thing anchoring him to reality. But even she seemed different now, distant, less human, as though the darkness was affecting her too. Suddenly, the corridor widened into a vast chamber. It was an impossible space too large to exist within the confines of the building. The ceiling stretched upward into shadow, and the walls were lined with what looked like mirrors, though they reflected nothing. In the center of the room stood an altar, an ancient stone structure covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. Max knew this was it. This was the egg. He approached the altar cautiously, his heartbeat loud in his ear. The shadows that had plagued him throughout his journey were no longer lurking in the corners. They were here, swirling around him, whispering his name, taunting him with visions of failure, with memories he had tried to bury. The darkness pressed in from all sides, tightening around him like a noose. He felt his knees weaken, his breath quicken, his hands shook as he reached out to touch the altar. But before his fingers made contact, Elena grabbed his wrist. She said, her voice trembling slightly for the first time since they met. Once you touch it, there's no going back. You need to be sure. Max pulled his hand back, turning to face her. What happens if I don't? Elena's eyes gleamed in the faint light prior, and the world will fall. The darkness will consume everything, and reality, as you know, will cease to exist. Max took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle on him. He had seen the darkness growing, felt its power creeping into every corner of the world. He knew she was right, but a part of him still hesitated, afraid of what touching the altar would mean, not just for the world, but for him. What will it do to me? Elena hesitated, her gaze softening. It will show you everything, the truth of your past, your present, and your future. It will strip away all illusions, all lies, and leave you with nothing but the raw, unfiltered reality. You will see things that cannot be unseen, and you will have to decide whether you can live with that truth. Max's hand trembled as he wiped sweat from his brow. He thought back to the war, to the things he had done, the choices he had made. He had already seen more than his share of horrors. Could there really be anything worse? Without another word, Max turned back to the altar. He reached out and placed his hand on the cold stone surface. At first, nothing happened. The room was silent, the shadows still. Then with a sudden jolt, the world around him began to ripple. The air itself seemed to tremble, and a deep, resonant hum filled the space, vibrating through his bone. Max gasped as the floor beneath him cracked open, and a swirling vortex of light and darkness erupted from the altar. It engulfed him in an instant, dragging him down into its depth. He fell for what felt like an eternity, tumbling through the void, disoriented and weightless. Images flashed before his eyes, memories, visions, things he couldn't comprehend. He saw himself as a young boy running through the fields behind his childhood home. He saw the faces of his fallen comrades, the look in their eyes as they took their last breaths on the battlefield. He saw the people he had hurt, the lives he had destroyed. And then in the midst of it all, he saw himself standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down into the abyss. Only this time, the abyss stared back. The darkness was alive. It was conscious. It knew him, and it had been waiting for him all along. Max tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. The darkness enveloped him, wrapping around him like a second skin. It whispered in his ear in a voice that was both familiar and alien. You are one of us. You always have been. Max struggled, fighting to break free, but the darkness tightened its grip. It showed him things, horrible things, the future, if he failed, the collapse of reality, the end of everything. But then, just as quickly, the images shifted. He saw something else, something he hadn't expected. He saw himself standing at the center of the swirling chaos, holding the darkness at bay. He saw the world rebuilding, healing, growing stronger. He saw a future where the darkness had no power over him, where he was in control. It was then that Max realized the truth. The darkness wasn't Trella, his enemy. It was a part of him. It always had been. He opened his eyes, his heart pounding in his chest. The vortex of light and darkness still surrounded him, but now it felt different. It wasn't tea suffocating him, it was filling him with power, with understanding. Max stood tall, his feet firmly planted on the ground. The shadows no longer frightened him. He reached out, and the darkness bent to his will, swirling around him like a cloak. Alina appeared before him, her face solemn.
Sure.
"You've done it, Tal," she said softly. "Dear, you've found the edge of darkness?" Max nodded, his mind clear. The darkness was never the enemy. "Fair," he said. "Teresa, it's a part of me, a part of all of us." Alina smiled faintly. "Yes, but not everyone is strong enough to face it. Not everyone can accept that truth." Max glanced around the chamber. The mirrors along the walls were no longer empty. They reflected him, now his true self, both the light and the dark, the balance. "What happens now?" Alina stepped closer, her hand resting gently on his arm. "Now you decide. You can stay here at the edge and protect the balance between worlds. Or you can return to your life with the knowledge of what you are and the power to control it." Max looked into her eyes, the weight of his journey settling on his shoulder. He had been a soldier, a man haunted by his past, but now he was something more. He had faced the darkness and come out the other side stronger. "I'll stay," he said finally. "I'll protect the balance." Alina nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "Your journey has only just begun." Max stood in the vast chamber, feeling the power of the edge of darkness coursing through him. The world around him was still, the shadows quiet. He had found the balance within himself, and now it was his duty to maintain it. The darkness was no longer something to fear. It was a part of him, an essential part. And with that knowledge, Max knew he could face whatever came next.